Good morning, and thanks for joining us today for DSA Virtual Access. Today, we are exploring the latest developments as well as what's ahead in the ongoing local and national urban recovery. Now, the last time we gathered like this about a month ago, the Kraken had brought the Stanley Cup playoffs back to Seattle for the first time in 104 years. And though they're out of the game now, they did make us all proud. Now, this summer, the Major League Baseball All-Star Game will return to Seattle on Tuesday, July 11th for the first time since 2001. And as for the Mariners, well, the Mariners are working on a little local and national recovery of their own at the moment. And that long baseball season is a good metaphor for the recovery underway in Seattle and other cities as we collectively emerge from what felt like 3 years of the closest thing to the World War II home front that any of us will ever experience, or let's hope. And in that long baseball season metaphor, there are grand slams and winning streaks and record attendance and shutouts and playoff droughts too. But here in Seattle anyway, the fans keep coming back, keep showing up. Over time, the team gets better and better, and I'll just stop there. Now, I do want to note that Seattle is not alone in this recovery effort. I'm told that in the audience today, we have downtown leaders from Pittsburgh, Hollywood, Long Beach, Atlanta, and Milwaukee, underscoring the commonality of the focus on urban recovery. And I won't even mention that it was Milwaukee that stole away Seattle's first Major League Baseball team back in 1970. But recovery means being in it for the long haul and having a long memory. Now, to go deep on this topic for the latest and for what's ahead, we couldn't have a better panel assembled. Kate Borders is president of University Circle Incorporated. She's transitioning from 9 years as the president and CEO of the Downtown Tempe Partnership to embark on a new role as the president of University Circle in Cleveland, Ohio. Prior to her time in Tempe, she was a nonprofit executive for more than a decade. Kate received her bachelor's degree from the University of Arizona and a master's from Columbia College, Chicago. She's the current chair of the International Downtown Association Board of Directors. Jessica Lappin is president of the Alliance for Downtown New York, which is the country's largest business improvement district, or BID, working to make Lower Manhattan a wonderful place to live, work, and play. Prior to that, she served 8 years as a New York City council member. A graduate of Georgetown University, Jessica is active on numerous boards and is currently vice chair of the International Downtown Association Board. Markham McIntyre is director of the City of Seattle's Office of Economic Development. He joined OED last year as interim director and was later promoted to the department's director in August. In this role, he's leading the mayor's Downtown Activation Plan, which includes a variety of initiatives to address the fentanyl crisis, recruit more street-level businesses to the urban core, and create events to draw people back downtown. Prior to joining the city, Markham spent nearly a decade at the Seattle Metro Chamber of Commerce, one of my old stomping grounds, in a variety of roles. He is a graduate of Whitman College. Now, we do have some questions we prepared in advance, and we'll get to audience questions sort of throughout the program. Now, as Simon mentioned, I want to encourage everyone to use the chat function to pose questions at any time during the conversation. Just anytime the spirit moves you, go to chat and type it in. We're keeping an eye on that, and we'll try and integrate those questions into the ones we've already planned, but we'll bring new stuff into as well. Now, we always start these conversations off with a lot of data points, or a handful of data points anyway, but we have a lot of data today. And these come from various sources and were compiled by the Downtown Seattle Association. All right, in the return to office category, the first week of May, which coincided with Amazon's first few days of returning to the office 3 days per week, that saw the highest daily average of workers in downtown with more than 77,000 worker visits per day. Now, as far as visitors are concerned, more than 2 million visitors came downtown in April. That's an increase of nearly 5% compared to April 2022. And it's approaching 92% of April 2019's total visitors. Hotel demand for April 2023 was 87% of April 2019's figures, and that comes from Visit Seattle. Now, we also have a record cruise season in progress, with the Port of Seattle estimating 1.4 million revenue passengers this season. And in the always important category of public safety, the first 3 months of 2023 saw 28% fewer violent crimes downtown compared with the same period in 2022. During this period, aggravated assaults decreased by 25%, and the number of robberies fell by 40%. I have one additional factoid that's courtesy of my colleague at Cairo News Radio, Chris Sullivan. He says that INRIX reports the average speed on westbound State Route 520 has dropped by 28% during the weekdays since the Amazon return, and the average speed on westbound I-90 has dropped by 38%. So obviously, as the recovery continues, the traffic picks up to almost to returning to our pre-pandemic levels. Now, I've just been handed a bulletin. I'm kidding, but I love to say that. This is from Gene Balk, the FYI guy at the Seattle Times. This is in today's paper. Seattle is once again the fastest growing city in the United States. And I'll quote, I think, his opening graph. From July 1st, 2021 to July 1st, 2022, Seattle had a net gain of about 17,750 people, bringing the total population to 749,000. The city's growth rate for the year pencils out to 2.4%, and that's easily the fastest among the 50 largest US cities. That rate of growth is quite comparable to what we saw in the 2010s. And I'm told that downtown specifically accounts for about 1/3 of that growth. All right, that's a lot of numbers. I think you can draw some general conclusions from those numbers and some specific things as well. So we've heard all those Seattle numbers, and we'll get into those in a lot of detail over the next hour. But I want to start with our out-of-town guests and get some perspective on what's going on in your communities and help us compare to what's going on in Seattle. And maybe there's things we can learn from you and vice versa. So would you like to start us out, Kate?
Absolutely. Thanks, Felix. So first of all, I think one of the things I love about this industry more than anything is that we are so open to sharing, and we all discuss what's happening in our downtowns because truly we're not competitive. I mean, I hear that you're loving to throw out these stats about your growth rates and, top cities and all of that, but truly we are sharing, and this kind of medium is wonderful. Even though I wish we were all in person, seeing the list of people that are here, paying attention from all of the different cities and different industries, and a lot of developers and tourism professionals even on this webinar. So I think it's great. I appreciate this opportunity. So thanks for having me. So in Tempe, I think we were doing a lot of things well leading up to the pandemic, and during the pandemic, we kind of continued. And, some things like transit and transportation were going really well in Tempe. We already had a light rail system, a really wonderful, robust busing system, and we launched in 2021 our streetcar, which connected all of these systems and got us, from point A to point B. People can really travel around the city, and which opens the door to, greater working opportunities as well. So our transit was really strong. Your public safety comments, we had, like every city, the pandemic increased our unhoused population. And over the last year, we've done a lot of work on that. And I think we're going to dig into some of that more in a second, but just at a high level, we have taken a very proactive approach to the unhoused population, what that means to security and crime, the link between poverty and crime, which is obviously there for a lot of our cities, and how we've been working towards getting people housed, getting them the services that they need in a very proactive way. And our social service agencies pairing up with our police on a daily basis to kind of assess what's going on has been incredibly helpful. So, and we can dig into that more. Our return to office, we're seeing that smaller offices, nonprofit, those sectors are returning faster. Our larger companies are returning slower, which I think is sort of what's happening everywhere. We're seeing, for the most part, 3-day weeks, whether that's being mandated or not, in office. We manage all of the parking in downtown, so we actually get to see on a real-time basis how people are physically driving into the office. And so the perception of what's happening is potentially even less than what we're hearing as far as these trends. We're not seeing workers in the office, even at, I think, anecdotally, we're hearing those 3 days a week. I would say that there are even days that we aren't quite there yet. So but I think that's where we're going to be. And everything that I'm hearing from my property owners, brokers, and the people that are in the know physically in these spaces are saying that by next year, we're going to see an even larger return. So they do believe that this is coming back. And your insurance companies, your financial services, all of those are coming back at a higher rate for us here locally. So I think there's some good news in there. And from a downtown perspective, we're getting the feedback from all of those tenants that what they're wanting are the amenities. So our products that are highly amenitized, a lot of food and beverage, they're wanting to see that. We're seeing tenants that are relocating into our downtowns from the other suburbs, the farther away suburbs, we're not familiar with Tempe, we are a submarket of Phoenix, but we're so close that we're still sort of that larger part of that larger Metro Phoenix area. And we're having a lot of suburban tenants relocate into Tempe at they're taking smaller square footages, but they're moving into a more highly amenitized space. And then our own tenants, what we're seeing is that as they're renewing their leases, they are renewing, but again, they may go from 100,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet. So they're kind of reassessing their needs, but staying in a downtown where they feel like there are many things for their employees to do. So that's super high level, and we can dig into all of that a little bit more, but I think the overall trend is good and supportive of our downtown, and our city's working well with our private sector to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to make it successful.
Okay. What about you in New York City?
Well, and I just want to echo what Kate said. One of the things I love about IDA is that you really can dig in with your peers and doing panels like this and see, the similarities that we're all experiencing across the country, and then how we're dealing with it in our own ways, given the cultures of our particular neighborhoods. I would say, it's interesting because a year ago, 2 years ago, on a panel like this, we would have been debating the question of is office dead? Will anybody ever be back in an office? And I think we've answered that question. That, yes, it may not be 5 days a week, but, similar to Tempe, I think 3 days is probably on average where we are. This I think a real understanding that having a physical space where people can come together, be it in teams or just to bond, to establish the culture of your company is incredibly important. And then how you use it, when you use it, that's still evolving. I don't know exactly where we're going to end up. We have the Castle data. I would say, the rough average, call it 50 to 60%. On a given day for people to be in the office. And I say sort of the average because I do think it skews very much. Fridays are just dead. Nobody's in the office on Fridays.
Before you go on, for people who don't know what the Castle data is, can you explain what that is? I know I hear that number a lot, but I don't think everyone knows exactly what that is.
No, that's a great point. It's a company that is looking at how people swipe in using the security turnstiles often within office buildings, so they can capture that data. Not all landlords use it. In fact, a lot of the larger ones in Lower Manhattan do not use it, and we have data from them separately. But it gives you a rough indication of the number of people who are going into the office. But what I like to remind folks, that if you walk downtown, especially Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there is an energy, a vibrancy. People are there, they're going out, they're in the parks, they're having lunch, they're going out at night, they're in their offices. So, even though that's the average, there are going to be days where you're going to see a much higher percentage, and you certainly feel that on the streets. I would say just very, very big picture. The good news: tourism, hospitality has definitely rebounded more quickly than we expected. We have 44 hotels downtown now, just in Lower Manhattan, 3 of which opened in the first quarter of this year. So our hotels are competing. They're seeing room rates and occupancy at levels that they're pretty happy with. Our retail very much has stabilized. In 2022, we had more places open than in 2019. So, obviously there was a shakeout in the pandemic, and not everybody survived, but we have definitely not just stabilized, but we're seeing growth in terms of street level retail. So those are some of the good things. Transit ridership is inching back up. Crime went down in the first quarter of this year, felonies and violent crimes in particular. So that's helping. But, at the end of the day, the commercial leasing is not great. We have just in Lower Manhattan 19.5 million square feet of vacant office space. It's a lot. We've got about 80 million overall. So we're seeing record high vacancy rates, higher than after September 11th. So that's very concerning. Like Kate said, there's a great disparity. Class A properties, trophy properties, buildings that are new at the World Trade Center site, for example, or have lots of amenities, are doing quite well. But the older buildings, especially built before 1975, are struggling, really, really struggling, both in terms of leasing and in terms of people being in those buildings on a day-to-day basis. So that's the long-term challenge. I wish I could say I thought there was going to be that by this time next year, it would all have changed. But you have the pandemic, you have rising interest rates, you have some unease with the economy overall, all contributing. Plus you have WeWork, the implosion of WeWork, which was a massive leaser of space all throughout the city. So lots of other factors at play as well.
So just a quick question about that kind of thing with real estate. When there's that much vacancy and it's hard to predict what's next in terms of all the other uncertainties around the economy and everything, how long a tail does that potentially have? Because I mean, that sounds like a lot of space and a lot of, for the Class A stuff, people are going for that, but these other older buildings that will require some kind of changes or updates or something. Can you predict how long the tail is of that sort of vacancy?
No. I mean, I would say it took us over 10 years after 9/11 to recover and exceed. So I'm not saying today that I think it's going to be 10 years, but I do think, we have a longer game view downtown of how long a recovery can take and how painful it can be. And there's more and more sublease space being added to the market every day. So I think it's going to be a real challenge. There's been a lot of talk across the country about conversions, residential conversions. Lower Manhattan sort of pioneered that trend in the mid-90s. We've already converted about 20 million square feet into residential. There will be more. There are 3 more happening right now as I speak. That will help some, but I think for us, well beyond the low-hanging fruit has already been converted. So people are reinvesting in buildings if they can, and they have the capital to create amenity spaces, and to renovate lobbies, et cetera. I don't know what the real answer is, whether it's more mixed use, whether it's more conversions, whether it's just waiting, unfortunately, for growth to happen organically as new businesses come into the market and grow. But it may take a while.
All right, Kate Borders and Jessica Lappin, thanks for the updates from Tempe and New York City. Perfect segue to talk to Markham McIntyre about the work he's doing at downtown Seattle, for the city of Seattle, with the downtown activation plan. Markham, what can you add to this in terms of like stuff we didn't cover in those glowing numbers I reported at the top of the show here? What sorts of things can you add to that in the work that you're doing?
Sure. Thanks, Felix. And just thanks to DSA for hosting this, and appreciate Kate and Jessica for being here this morning. As we're just all describing, one similar constant is that downtown runs on people. We've got to have people downtown for it to work. They've got to be living, working, visiting. That's the key to what makes it go. And so for Mayor Harrell, that's the overarching goal for his downtown activation plan, is how do we get more people downtown? Knowing that, as Jessica and Kate have said, conditions have changed drastically. We can't look into a crystal ball and kind of figure out what return to office actually looks like down the road. And so we've got to think about kind of short, medium, long-term ways that we can incentivize people to come downtown, have more people living down here, have more people visiting, have more people working. So the mayor has generated 7 goals for this plan. And I'm going to share them really quickly, just because I think they echo some of what we heard from Jessica and Kate. And then this is really how we're organizing our thinking around downtown activation. Give me 1 second. I try to do this. Okay, so it's 7 goals, which seems like a lot, but again, downtown is big and complicated and interesting, and we want to make sure that we're giving it really the time and attention that it deserves. So first and foremost is thinking about making sure that downtown is safe and welcoming for all. Public safety really is a gating issue for people wanting to come downtown. And I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Second, as we've described, is thinking about downtown as a residential neighborhood. We have a record number of people living downtown in Seattle right now, and we'd love to see more. So it's creating more housing, but also, as Jessica and Kate have mentioned, what are the amenities that people really want to see for living in a neighborhood? Re-envisioning downtown as a hub for arts, culture, and entertainment. We already are a hub for arts, culture, and entertainment, but there's so much more that we can do. Kate in our prep call talked about embracing artists and embracing creative economy as part of the next step, and I couldn't agree more. Seattle loves and lives its environmental ethos, and so thinking about downtown as a beacon for a healthy, sustainable, and green city is really important. This next one is a little bit jargony, but really it's about how do we encourage workers to want to come downtown. Jessica mentioned the benefits of being in person, being in the office, being collaborative. There's a ton of benefit there, and we really want to maximize that and figure out what are the other things that workers are looking for that are going to draw them back downtown. For my shop, for the Office of Economic Development, we care deeply about this next one and thinking about downtown as the commercial heartbeat of the city. So how are we supporting those large employers with their needs, especially with return to office? But more importantly, how are we thinking about downtown as an incubator for small, diverse businesses, especially as we think about vacant storefronts and opportunities with what consumers want to see, but also how we can help generate intergenerational wealth for BIPOC entrepreneurs downtown is really important to us. And then finally, I think similar to the other two, tourism's been a little bit of a bright spot for us coming out of the pandemic. Felix, you mentioned in the numbers at the top that we're close to reaching our 2019 numbers, and we're looking at a big summer this year. Frankly, what we need to think about is how can we do a better job marketing to our regional tourists. There's still kind of a narrative and a perception issue that we're dealing with our regional folks. And there's an opportunity to do more with drawing them downtown, seeing it really as a unique social gathering space for them to enjoy as well. So that's, excuse me.
Actually, put the back up for a second. I want to ask you a couple questions while you've got the
Yeah, sure.
goals up there just for a second. Now, are there, all those things sound great, right? But they sound very general. Are there deliverables or numbers associated with those 7 items?
Yeah, so a couple things. Right now, we're still workshopping a lot of these ideas. The full plan will be released at the end of June. Right now, we're going through kind of our community engagement process where we've been meeting with a variety of different neighborhood groups, business groups, community advocates, and leaders to test out some of the ideas that we've collected and see what have we missed, how are these resonating with folks to really refine down what we want to have in the plan. We really want to be careful about making sure that we can deliver what we say we're going to deliver. We've looked at a lot of other cities' downtown activation plans, and there are some fantastic ideas. We have borrowed many of those ideas. One thing that's been missing in some of the plans is kind of a clear accountability and operations plan. So we really want to make sure that we're thinking about how we're going to pay for these things, how we're actually going to prioritize these within different departments, as well as making sure that we're not just thinking about the city, but we're thinking about partnerships with the private and philanthropic sectors, because it's not just the city doing this. There's certain things that we're responsible for and we can really activate, but there's other stuff that we're going to need to work with partners. So making sure that we've got a mix of partnerships to actually make sure that we deliver this is going to be a key part of the plan as well.
All right. And there's a question from one of the audience members.
Yeah.
It says making downtown attractive to residents is the best way to make it a magnet for tourists. So are there elements of what you're working on that has that focuses on the people who are already living downtown and having them be part of the return and recovery as well?
Absolutely. And we're hearing a lot from them, certainly around some of the issues around public safety and homelessness. But also some interest in how do we get more affordable grocery stores? How do we get more childcare and educational space? How do we make it more family friendly by making events happening during the day or during the weekend free and accessible to kids and to families? Also thinking about how we can have things open later in the evening, particularly for workers that might be working late or coming off of service industry jobs. How are we making sure there's family-friendly options for them later in the evening, not just ending at kind of 5, 6, or 7. So I think there's a variety of things that we can do, and I would agree that making it attractive for families and for residents is going to double up and help with the tourism as well.
And then last question about the goals on the screen right now. So
Sure.
say a year from now or a year from whenever this comes out in final form, will we be able to look back and look at these different criteria and measure sort of how the Harrell administration has done in implementing these things?
Yeah, so as part of our accountability plan, we're working with Tableau, which is a local company that's been purchased by Salesforce, on a publicly facing dashboard that has metrics for each of these. And again, all of the metrics are based on people. So it's largely looking at foot traffic and transactions that are happening in each of these different 7 categories. So that's going to be part of what we deliver with the plan, is a public facing dashboard that we'll be able to look back on, but also use as we're kind of testing out some of these ideas and figure out if they're working or not, and how we might need to adjust or how we might need to stop something and start something new if it's not working.
Okay. In a second, I want to get to a question about perception and the narrative and that sort of thing in terms of reaching those people who are outside the immediate Seattle area to become visitors. But before we do that, I want to see, Mark, those numbers we talked about, return to office, and Amazon being back 3 days a week. Can you flesh out with anecdotally about what's gone on with Amazon or other companies in town that are on the verge or already doing that sort of return to office policies?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, workers and employees are, especially for those large employers, are incredibly important part of our downtown economy. So we really do want to see them come back and want to, again, think about ways that we're making it a benefit for them to be in office. We're seeing a huge variety of policies across different companies. You might think that they would have kind of a unified perspective on this. They do not. But we are seeing more and more companies choosing to bring workers back. I can't remember if it was Jessica or Kate, but it does seem like 2 or 3 days seems to be kind of the norm that people are bringing folks back. I think they're still learning how to do that, and trying to figure out what's actually going to get people back in the office and how then to maximize their time while they're in the office. So I think there's a lot of learning to be done. I know that the Downtown Seattle Association, the Seattle Metro Chamber, and an organization called Challenge Seattle, which represents a lot of our large employers, are working on kind of a playbook, best practices that they can work with and give out to employers to help them think about how effectively to roll out return to office policies, but then also once they're coming back into the office, how to maximize that time and make sure that everyone's feeling like it's really well used while they're in the office.
And I know a lot of smaller companies that don't have the horsepower to do a lot of thinking about policy and that sort of stuff. They look to big companies, whether it's Amazon or others. Are there other local companies in Seattle, big companies that have sort of committed to return to office that we can point to and say, like, this is happening as well?
Yeah, a couple recent ones that announced were Weyerhaeuser, which is down in our Pioneer Square area in Occidental Park, and they built a new building recently before the pandemic. So very exciting to have them coming back. And then Redfin's another one that recently announced that they'd be bringing folks back 2 days a week. So again, each week seems to bring a piece of either large news or kind of under the radar news about companies bringing folks back. But I still think, as Kate was saying, it's hard to evaluate how effective those policies are really being, and then again how that's landing with employees and how they feel like their time's being used. And so I think there's a lot to learn, and that's again where the IDA and other organizations that allow us to share what's working and what's not are going to be critically important in the next couple years as we kind of sort this out, and companies really look to each other and to other organizations to try to figure this out.
Okay. And then there's a comment, someone saying they can't hear me very well. I'll try and move closer to the microphone. I apologize for that. Are you guys, the panelists, hearing me okay right now? Do I sound okay?
Yeah.
And in terms of that perception and the narrative and how the media portrays conditions in various downtowns, in New York City, you've had issues with this, right, Jessica?
Unfortunately, we have. The New York Post most famously, but the Times as well, certainly throughout the pandemic and for an extended period, the coverage was so incredibly negative when it came to public safety and homelessness and other issues, which were real issues, but were so sensationalized. And there was some distortion even of facts. So it was very frustrating, especially, as groups were trying to encourage corporate citizens to encourage their employees to come back, to be having to counter this sort of, what I didn't think was an accurate narrative. For months, people kept saying, downtown's dead, downtown's dead. I can't get a reservation for dinner anywhere. So I don't know what you're talking about. So, those are the things that were just blatantly inaccurate. I was like, there are tourists back, the neighborhood is buzzing. That doesn't mean that everybody who's out and about at the bar at 5 o'clock was in their office earlier in the day, but people are still kind of enjoying downtown. So, I'm hoping that as we have sort of, gotten a little bit further into 2023, that some of that has subsided. There are other issues out there, and I'm not going to deny crime did go up, homelessness did go up, but it was really being somewhat misrepresented. And unfortunately, when you have a very violent random killing on the subway, and it's a big tragedy, it's also, it really captures people's attention, even if it's, one event. So, and then the mayor flooded the subways with police officers, and that's had an impact as well. So it's been a little bit touch and go. We haven't had sort of a champion, other than, I will say, our local newspapers, which I will say, especially in the pandemic, but beyond, to get information about who was open, who was closed, where you could get a shot, what was happening, placemaking, all of that. I think our local neighborhoods and local newspapers in New York have been the cheerleaders and creating that connection and bond within neighborhoods. And so, it's been a tough time for publishing, but we're really grateful that those more local outlets have survived.
And I guess in the old days, or maybe still in smaller media markets, the mayor could, get together the publishers of the papers and knock their heads together and say, come on, we got all, not provide misinformation, but, tell a story that focuses on the positive, or sort of at least is transparent about what's really happening versus what a particular narrative is. Now, I think, Kate, in Tempe, you guys have a great relationship. It's a smaller market, and you didn't really have this issue. Is that true?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating when we talk about our different places and how drastically different some of these challenges can be. I mean, Jessica, really quickly, how big is your district?
In terms of office space,
Just your square footage or your
it's
blocks or your
one square
mileage.
mile, 80 million square feet of office space, $23 million.
So, I mean, our entire downtown is half a mile square. So if you think about Markham, how big is the downtown district for Seattle from square miles?
Don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. I'm sure it's relatively large, right?
Yeah.
So here we are in this very small area. It's Arizona in its entirety is in one of the youngest states, obviously. Tempe is young, and our office market has a lot of new buildings. So we haven't been talking about conversions like you were talking about, Jessica, because we have all these new buildings. We have incredible tourism because of our climate. We've had that to kind of rebound and help us recover. So a lot of the things that we're talking about in this small microcosm we get to watch. But to your direct question about media and how we work with the media, we have an incredible partnership with our city and the PIOs with the city, and we're very proactive about feeding the media news in partnership with our city. The main PIO there has been there for quite some time, so she has great relationships with all of the media. And so we're able to kind of guide the story. But I will say sometimes in trying to protect stories from getting out in the way that you may or may not want them to be, perceived by the greater community, some of the successes also don't get told. So, for example, a year ago, our city proactively removed over 200 people from the riverbed, and they were unhoused. A population was living in the riverbed, which is adjacent to our downtown. It was a really well thought out process. They spent months letting people know, informing them that this was coming. The riverbed itself was a very dangerous place. It was flooded often by our canal system. So there were, deaths would occur in this situation. So there was really no option other than to find housing in other locations for these people. But that's very controversial, right? This is where they're living currently. This is where their community is. And our city approached it with looking closely at every single issue that an individual could have, whether it was addiction issues, whether they had pets and they needed pet services, all of that. And they were very kind, but the media didn't grab onto it in a positive or a negative way. And I would say we were grateful that we didn't get, some of the negative that could be the misinformation that could go out. But we also didn't celebrate the successes of rehousing, these 200 people. And that was a year ago, and it has, really had a huge impact. And from an economic development perspective, I can say that we had tenants that were thinking about moving here who would see that situation and then rethink moving here. So it is, the overall impact of all of this is huge on the growth of the city.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And, one of the ways of combating that narrative, the false narrative, is by having things happening in a downtown area that people want to attend, which is this whole concept of placemaking, which I think is, I think maybe the general public doesn't think about placemaking very much, but people who work for downtown organizations and business, sort of community development organizations, it's like and it's not even a buzzword. It's been an idea that's been around for decades. Markham, in terms of placemaking in downtown Seattle, and just by the way, Seattle's 83 square miles, 4% of which is downtown. So by my math, that's about 3.2 square miles. And I just got a note I'm reading and making it sound like I had it off the top of my head. But in this 3.2 square mile area of Seattle, what's the city of Seattle looking at in terms of this placemaking? First of all, for people who don't know what that is, define what placemaking is and tell us about what the plans are.
Sure. Well, I just want to jump in on that last part, because I do think the narrative is really, really important. And I think that one thing that, as much as I love Seattle and am very bullish about our future, I think one thing we're really bad at is bragging about ourselves. And so actually being proud of the things that we have or that are coming up and really celebrating those and championing those out and about, I think is something that we're really reluctant to do. And so I think that's something that we can do more of, and that can be part of our placemaking strategy as well, because certainly in downtown, we've got a lot of incredible assets that have just come online or coming online. We had our new convention center open earlier this year, which is super exciting. We've got our waterfront, our new waterfront park, which is going to be transformative. And I really don't think even the residents of Seattle understand just how special that's going to be and how much of a big deal that's going to be. That's going to be coming up pretty soon. And then, as you mentioned, we've got a lot of events going on. We just had the Kraken, unfortunately, lose in the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, but they were at Climate Pledge Arena, and that was going bananas every time they were playing. We have the MLB All-Star Game coming later this summer. And then that's all kind of a prelude to in 2026 when we host 4 to 6 games of the FIFA World Cup. So again, we've got a lot of things that are big and exciting and that we can kind of hitch our wagon to. But I don't think that we're great about bragging about those or kind of celebrating them enough. As far as placemaking, I think for us, that is a big geographic area that you just described, Felix, and there are a bunch of smaller neighborhoods within our broader downtown activation zone. And so it's working closely with those neighborhoods to understand their particular needs, their particular wants, and really specifically designing programs and policies that help them with what they're going through. We have our Chinatown and International District. We've got Pioneer Square. We've got our retail core. We've got the waterfront. We've got Belltown, all kind of having similar but different needs. And I think it's just important for the city to be able to have strong partnerships, strong communication to understand what they want, and then help them deliver those services as best we can.
Yeah. And I want to bring in Jen Casilla from Downtown Seattle Association with some additional updates on some specifics around placemaking initiatives. Jen, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
terrific.
hear you.
Thanks for joining us. I know you're very busy today. Thanks for joining us for this.
No problem. Thanks for letting me chime in here. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Jen Casilla with the Downtown Seattle Association. Just to chime in about how important that public realm placemaking is and what an important and crucial role it really plays in the urban recovery. And I like what you said, Felix, that, sometimes placemaking might not be known to the general audience, but I think that's kind of the point. Some of it is that surprise and delight, just making downtown spaces vibrant and interesting. Someone might be coming downtown for something else, and they stumble into a park and there's food trucks and activation and a concert or bubbles or something kind of interesting. So I obviously restaurants, hotels reopening and opening, new openings, arts and culture establishments, all of those are really obviously key economic drivers to stabilization and recovery. But I think the public spaces in between all of those places are really crucial to completing that picture. And so here at DSA, we've been in this, placemaking business for about 8 years, really trying to revitalize 2 major urban parks in downtown, Westlake Park and Occidental Square. And it's been really fun. We've been able to experiment and do really interesting things. And the pandemic didn't do us any favors in that regard, but we're definitely back in, leaning into it and expanding a model that has really worked, and looking at additional spaces and public parks and plazas where we can activate with concerts and performances and ice skating rinks and mini golf and art installations and lighting and all of that. So I just think that's a really important piece to all of this, the urban recovery, and working really closely with Markham and his department in the community outreach and making sure that community voices are heard and that we spread that activation everywhere and for everyone. And that's also really important. It's all of these things are just out there for everyone to enjoy, free, open to the public, to be really woven into the community. So that's my pitch for urban recovery.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Jen Casillas, for joining us from Downtown Seattle Association about the specific initiatives. So in terms of, have you had success with this in New York City, Jessica?
100%, and I was thinking earlier today about when Kate mentioned that, placemaking was something that people didn't really understand or wanted to support, or maybe even rolled their eyes at a number of years ago. I think it's now almost just accepted as a best practice. And we have done a lot of it. We had been experimenting with it somewhat pre-pandemic, but I would say we've definitely doubled down. We did a performing arts series that actually, I guess it was 21, Vogue said was like a must-see of the summer, Vogue magazine. And we used loading docks from commercial buildings because they make natural stages, frankly, and they were outside. So even though it was free, we did have it ticketed because of COVID, but that was a perfect way to kind of find a cool use for a different space. We have light exhibitions, we have art exhibitions, we have concerts. So we're definitely doing more of that. I think it's important to to sort of remind people why they love New York, remind people why they live in New York. I do think arts and culture are a big piece of that for so many of us. But whether you're in the office that day or just wandering around, to sort of delight, surprise, and make you feel good about being in our downtowns. So we have done, we will continue to, there are other arts festivals that happen on their own, Tribeca Film Festival, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. I mean, I think the big thing for us this fall will be the opening of the Perlman Performing Arts Center at the World Trade Center site, which is almost like a sort of a Lincoln Center downtown. Michael Bloomberg is the chairman of the board. It's spectacular. They're announcing their season very shortly, and they're going to open to sort of coincide with the anniversary of 9/11. But it's going to be a game changer for us to give us one of the city's premier cultural institutions right in the heart of Lower Manhattan.
Yeah, that's great. What about in Tempe?
I would say that this is one of the things that, this is the fun part, right, of the work, when we get to actually work with artists and create experiences. Really our jobs are to gather people together, which was why it was so demoralizing to be in a pandemic and not be able to literally do the thing that you're charged to do. So I think that we have this opportunity now that placemaking is, as Jessica said, more appreciated and understood and even funded by our government partners. We're seeing that here in Tempe, that we're getting, a level of partnership from our city that we have never gotten before. Some of that was this desire to be scrappy coming out of the pandemic. How do we get people to return? How do we create experiences? But it's also, you asked during our prep session, Felix, about scalability. And I mentioned earlier that downtown Tempe is, I'm dealing with half a mile square, but it's a community and it's a neighborhood. And Jessica has a collection of neighborhoods and communities, and so do you in Seattle, and the areas that Markham's working with. So we have these like neighborhoods, and each one of them has a culture and a feel, and it has a group of artists that love it, and it has a community and members of community that love it. And I think tapping into that and getting those people to weigh in on what they want in their downtowns or in their literally their neighborhoods, and how they want to impact that, getting them involved with the decision making and then also the execution of placemaking is huge. And then that also will build equity, because we need all of these activations, whether they are large scale events that are bringing tens of thousands of people, all the way down to just experiences that you walk through, and public art, and every version of that, right? Whether it's just lighting or a chair or seating, all the way up to large scale events. We need those to be equitable, and we need them to be desired and create a sense of belonging for every member of our community. And that's our opportunity right now, right? The growth is in creating these unique characters within each of our places, because I think we've all seen for many, many years that there were these sameness situations that occurred where these trends were happening in all of our downtowns, and we'd get like, everybody would get a farm to table restaurant, and then everybody would get, something that was so similar. Every downtown has a big chair or a painting of somebody with wings that you can take a photo in front of, right? So there's a lot of
Wait, you're ruining it. You're ruining it for me.
Right. All those are great, but then adding to that, what your community specifically wants is where the beauty happens. And that's where everyone's going to feel like they belong. That's kind of where I think our opportunity is here.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of these things can be impacted by the perception, this narrative we're talking about, this perception of public safety. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about public safety in Seattle and fentanyl and those sorts of issues. Markham, what part of the downtown activation plan, how does that address specific issues around public safety? We have a audience question about plans to make bus stops safer at Third and Cherry,
Mhm.
Third and Pike Street, in terms of that serves everybody, visitors and residents. So where does public safety fit into the downtown activation plan?
Sure. And Third Avenue is definitely one of our priority areas where historically it's it just had some issues. And so we're really thinking about how we transform it both now and in the future is definitely part of our downtown activation plan. So I'll be clear, like I have not been charged with developing a public safety plan as part of the downtown activation plan. We're working closely with SPD, our fire department, our unified care team, and others that are on the ground working on public safety issues, because the two are so closely related. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really, for a lot of people, it's a gating issue about whether they want to come downtown or not. And it certainly bleeds into that narrative about what downtown is now. And it's, as far as if you look at some of the opinion research out there, it's the number one, it's become the number one concern for a lot of folks. For us, a lot of that revolves around fentanyl and open air drug markets and synthetic drug use. And so the mayor really has, he's put forward an executive order that we announced when we announced the downtown activation plan. And really he's trying to balance treatment and treating people with humanity, and understanding that those who are addicted to substances need a high touch outreach opportunities to get into service, as well as we need some new types of programs. It's not just the same old. This fentanyl is a poison. It's new, it's dangerous, it is spreading rapidly and wildly. No city has really figured it out. So we really want to try some new things in cooperation with University of Washington, state, feds, others, to really try to figure out, are there other strategies that we can use, particularly on the substance abuse and addiction side. Secondly, we've got to disrupt the drug markets. We can't allow these things to be coming into our community easily and freely. Like, we've got to have a law enforcement approach to cracking down there. Now, obviously that comes with the burden of the challenges of our criminal justice system and the racism inherent in it right now. So it is not an easy conversation, but I'm pleased you mentioned the stats at the top of the hour about how we're seeing some of the trends in crime decreasing. And I think we should take heart in that and know that the mayor and his team and our police officers are working very, very closely and hard on how to crack this.
Okay. And this is sort of related to that, especially around Third Avenue. There's another audience question about retail. This person says, help me understand how you can state retail has rebounded. Large chains, Macy's, Banana Republic, and Nike left, creating a big gap in retail. And a lot of us read the story last night and this morning about that new PCC down there at Rainier Square, struggling compared to how they thought it would do. What does the downtown activation plan do in terms of those big retailers that just aren't there anymore?
Yeah. So again, it's got to be a mix of things that we can do right now and then things over time. So right now we're really focused on filling vacant storefronts and trying to see that as an opportunity to get new entrepreneurs into downtown that maybe didn't feel welcome or didn't have that opportunity pre-pandemic. We run a program called Seattle Restored at our office, where we work with property owners, we work with small businesses, and provide a lot of wraparound support to make sure that they're successful, both getting into the space, improving the space, and then working their business out of there. I'm proud to say that we've actually just had 2 of our Seattle Restored participants sign long-term leases. We're really excited about that, about the opportunity where they come in for 6 months to kind of get their foot in the door. And then we really want to figure out a way to help make that sustainable over time. So filling those vacant storefronts, giving new opportunities to new retailers is critical. But part of the downtown activation plan, I am asking for more people to help with our ground floor and our retail strategies. And similar to what we were just talking about with placemaking, not having necessarily the city impose what we want, but working with those neighborhoods who often have their own retail strategies and are just looking for some more horsepower and more support, particularly from the city and the mayor's office. How can we bring that to bear to make sure that they're successful? And as Kate, I think, said, I was looking for the heart reaction button, I couldn't find it. But this idea of, like, you want to have it unique to that really kind of embraces and embodies the feel of those little neighborhoods is incredibly important. And that means a different mix depending on the block, depending on the neighborhood, depending on the geographic area, and being really smart and thoughtful about who we're trying to bring in there that really accentuates that and doesn't kind of diminish it over time.
And so, apart from the dashboard that will follow the statistics of these different goals for downtown activation, how will the general public, or what can we expect to see? What should we look to and point at as, like, okay, there's proof, there's visual evidence that we're making progress toward, urban recovery in downtown Seattle?
Yeah, well, I mean, the end goal, a dashboard can try to embody it, but the end result is going to be harder to quantify because it's going to be a feeling, right? It's going to be, how do people feel that the ground floor experience has changed? Like on the sidewalk, do they feel like it's improved? Does it have the things that they want to do and see? We've heard the phrase kind of surprise and delight when they come down here. Like, do we have exceptional spaces that they're really, really proud of and want to visit again and tell everybody about? So it is going to be a little bit more organic and more of a feeling thing. As I mentioned, though, I think there's a ton of stuff happening right now. It's not like downtown is static in any regard. Like, we have new experiences, new restaurants opening all the time. I think there's an opportunity for the city, in cooperation with our private and philanthropic partners, to do a better job of communicating it. Again, I don't think we're telling kind of a common story about the trends and how things are getting better and how many interesting things there are. So I think that's an opportunity, especially over the summer, for us to do a better job of communicating out what's actually happening and encouraging people to come check it out for themselves and hopefully change that feeling.
Okay. What about in Tempe and New York City? I mean, again, the statistics are one thing, and, I can sit here and read off the data points and everything, but what's the feel on the sidewalk when you're out on I guess a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday? Mondays and Fridays are not necessarily what they once were, but what's the feel on a that makes you think we're making progress on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday?
Jessica, I'll let you start.
Well, is this related to crime specifically, or just
Just the stuff, the unquantifiables, the stuff where where if you live somewhere or you visit somewhere enough, you just kind of know things are getting better or getting worse. I mean, that's oversimplifying it a little bit too much.
Yeah, there are lots of different factors, right? And so, I think, and I was the one who maybe had said, for us, retail has rebounded. We had 150 stores open last year. In 2019, it was only 109. The chains are struggling. The malls may be a different story, but food and beverage and new entrepreneurs coming in to take advantage of some of these vacancies has really made a change. So you see that, you feel that, and maybe it's a new twist on an old idea, meaning we have a coffee shop that Architectural Digest said was the most beautiful coffee shop in the world, right? So lots of places sell coffee, but that's their niche. And I think in terms of crime, sort of responding to, I saw one of the the attendees' comments, as I said, our numbers have started to come down, and that's been very helpful, I think, in terms of calming people down and actual public safety. It's been helpful. But in terms of the negative intangibles, somebody had mentioned, this feeling of sort of lawlessness, or that there's only focus on very violent crimes. That has been a very hot topic in New York. It's often, wrapped up in bail reform, but having removed a lot of the authority from district attorneys and others to prosecute repeat offenders who are really, in many instances, responsible for the bulk of, be it shoplifting or other crimes. So, I think there is a feeling that the public realm isn't being controlled well enough, that lower level offenses are being ignored, and that there's a little bit of mayhem. And there, I have to say, there is some truth to that. And we're not going to get into whole criminal justice discussion and progressive views or otherwise, but there has been probably a shift too far in one direction. So I don't know if that answers the question. It was more sort of tying together a couple of different threads.
Yeah, no, that's good. And we're just about out of time. We just have about 5 minutes left in the program. And Markham asked a question when we were in our prep session the other day about looking ahead about 5 years and what you see, how your downtowns will be different than they are today. And obviously this comes off this 3+ year pandemic that changed everything. Some long-standing intractable issues got worse. Levels of cooperation got better in some instances to kind of tackle things more pragmatically and get things done more quickly, get people housed, get problems taken care of that the pandemic meant you had to take care of, or things would get a lot worse. I know it's hard to predict. I know, like during World War II, when, women were in the workforce more than they had been obviously ever before with a lot of men overseas fighting, that created all sorts of sociological changes that, lasted for decades. And I think we'll have things from the pandemic like that as well. But in terms of your downtowns, let's start with Tempe. Let's look at Tempe 5 years from now. Give me about, sort of what you see, a short version, short answer. I got about 30 seconds here of an answer about what you see 5 years from now. What will have changed most dramatically and, in a good way?
Well, I think we have really strong leadership, and I think all things that were once new are new again at some point in time. And, you know, a year ago, from a public safety perspective, we added walking cops again. And it's amazing how that proactive just community response is so drastic. So our crime has just really taken a really great dive, which is incredible. Our city is thinking a lot about our streetscape and the infrastructure that's needed to attract new developers and really that F&B to kind of fill out what we need from, like, so we have a lot of grab and go. We need a lot more sit down. So we're doing a lot of infrastructure projects to get that and to attract those tenants. So I think our 5-year outlook is really strong. And then the other piece about this return to work, this is going to play out. I mean, there's so many things that are still happening, right? And I wish we could talk for hours, because Amazon did bring people back, but then immediately there was this, pushback from all their employees. Then we saw the same thing happen from Disney, and then their pushback from their employees. So like these major entities are kind of dictating how the smaller companies will respond. And we're going to see that in our downtowns. But the conversation is being had because I think right now the power is still with the employees, because our unemployment is so low, right? So they get to dictate. So that's all going to play out. But I think Tempe's going to be strong. And I think Seattle and New York are obviously also going to be really strong. So it's exciting.
And just a quick word from you, Jessica, before we go to Markham for the last word on this subject.
Yeah, I think there will be some pain in the near term, unfortunately, because I'm a very optimistic person. But I will say, long term, you always bet on New York. We are, I think, going to continue to grow. And I would just say, we have 65,000 residents at this point. That those numbers are going to continue to grow downtown, and for better or worse, record high rents. So a lot of demand, whether they're in the office 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, people want to live downtown, and that's going to help drive our recovery. So long term, I'm very bullish.
Very good. And Mark, I'll give you about a minute. Give me your answer to your own question.
Very bullish about downtown Seattle. Thank you for using that word, Jessica. That's one of my favorite words. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like it's a real mixed bag right now. But as you said at the top, Felix, people are still moving to Seattle. They want to be here. The things that we have in terms of natural environment, quality of life, and economic opportunity are unparalleled. And so people really want to be here. And I think that's only going to result in more people wanting to be downtown. And that's just going to be great for us, because downtown runs on people.
All right. Well, on that cheery note, cheery long-term, long horizon note, I want to thank our panelists, Kate Borders, Jessica Lappin, and Markham McIntyre. And I want to thank you for joining us today for DSA Virtual Access. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions, but I really enjoyed the dialogue, really enjoyed the conversation. I want to thank, as always, the fabulous DSA staff, John Scholes, Sally Wright, James Cito, and Simon Villanueva. And then this summer, you got the MLB All-Star Week, you got Seafair, Bite of Seattle, 50th anniversary of Bumbershoot, so much more going on, and all wrapped around what's probably going to be a record number of visitors to downtown Seattle in this summer of 2023. But before all that, please plan on joining us here again on Thursday, June 15th, for our next edition of DSA Virtual Access. Keep an eye on your inbox for more information about that, and you can get more about this series by going to the Downtown Seattle Association website at downtownseattle.org. Until then, I'm Felix Bunnell on behalf of DSA. Thanks for joining us this morning, and we will see you downtown.